Hi, everyone. We're going to start in just a couple of seconds, just waiting for everyone to filter in. Thanks so much for being with us here this morning / afternoon / evening, depending on where you find yourself. All right. I think we've got a nice group of people here. Let's get started. We'll let people in as they join us. So hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. For those that don't know me, my name is Maytal Kowalski. I'm the Vice Chair of JSpace Canada. At JSpace Canada, our vision is a future of self-determination and sovereignty for Jews and Palestinians in Israel-Palestine, championed by Canadian Jews. We aim to shift the conversation around Israel-Palestine from our political institutions to our Shabbat tables. We believe the way to do this is exactly what we are doing right now, coming together, raising our voices, and finding community. Before we proceed, I do want to acknowledge that this event is taking place on the ancestral homelands of Indigenous people across Canada, caretakers and stewards of this land for time immemorial, each with their own unique traditions, languages, and history. I'm today in Vancouver, BC, which is the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. A few housekeeping notes. So as you likely noticed, we are recording this session and we do share these afterwards on our YouTube channel with all of our supporters. The recording only picks up the spotlighted speakers, but if you're in any way concerned, you're free to turn off your camera. Everyone's muted, whatever you're comfortable with. We usually have just kind of one speaker and we can kind of be luxurious with our time. We're really fortunate today that we have 4 amazing speakers. So we'll dedicate a short segment to each one and then we'll save all the questions for the end. So you can either put your questions in the chat as things come up and I'll ask them on your behalf at the end, or you can unmute yourself and you're free to ask any of our guests a question right at the end. Today, specifically, we're going to be talking about the response to rising settler violence in the occupied West Bank and how grassroots organizers are responding to this violence. We are joined by some amazing individuals from some NGOs out of Israel-Palestine, Rabbis for Human Rights, and Yesh. Founded in 1988 in response to contraventions of human rights taking place in the occupied territories, Rabbis for Human Rights is an Israeli organization active in 3 main areas: work within and about the occupied territories, work to promote social and economic justice within Israel, and activities in the fields of education and interreligious dialogue. Yesh was established in 2005 and has since worked to protect the human rights of Palestinians living under Israeli armed forces occupation. Yesh views the occupation as a main source of the violation of the human rights and therefore seeks to end it. Yesh documents, collects, and disseminates reliable and updated information regarding systematic human rights violations in the occupied Palestinian territories. And so with that, I'm going to bring forward for our first speaker, Hannah Doolan, who's the Director of International Relations at Yesh. Hannah, let me add you here. Awesome. And I'll get you to unmute yourself. And thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me.
So let's jump in. We've got a packed schedule, so let's get right to the questions. So I think that most of the folks that are here on the webinar today are probably joining us because they are familiar with, to some extent, with the fact that settler violence happens in the occupied territories. So we know that, we've got our baseline, but I want to drill a bit deeper and ask you to talk to us about some of the trends specifically that you're seeing. And specifically with regards to this current Israeli government and the increase in incitement and inflammatory remarks that we've seen coming from sitting ministers. How does that actually, what are the trends that you're seeing, and how is the political situation really affecting what's happening on the ground?
Excellent question. And I really want to thank everyone who came here to listen to this today. I know it's like not the most fun or uplifting topic, but it's super important. And settler violence is one of the main tactics that is characteristic of the occupation actually since the beginning. So I know that it's definitely become increasingly in public awareness recently, especially after the massive attack that happened in Hua a few months ago. But it is true that settler violence has been happening literally since the beginning. And the form that these attacks typically take is a few different things. Normally, the most classic kind of settler violence attack that we've seen over the decades is attacks on Palestinians when they're out working in their fields. So they're mostly on agricultural land in Area C, where settlers will come, harass, intimidate, physically beat Palestinians. Oftentimes we see massive amounts of olive trees being cut down and agriculture destroyed. And the destruction of trees, which may not sound like such a severe phenomenon, actually has massive impact on the ability of Palestinians to earn their livelihood. A lot of Palestinian villages in the West Bank are largely agricultural villages. And the period of the olive harvest, for example, which happens every year around September, October, has become one of the most, which is typically a joyful and celebratory time and has great cultural significance for Palestinians, has become a time of violence, fear. Many Palestinian communities are unfortunately abandoning the harvest completely as they're actually too afraid to even go out into their fields. So this is a very normal type of violence that we see. Also, stone throwing on roads. Settlers will stand at junctions near Palestinian towns and throw stones at passing cars, which sometimes only results in some damage to the car, but also has killed people on several occasions and caused serious accidents. And another thing that we see typically is what were called for a long time price tag attacks, where this is basically where settlers would enter Palestinian towns during the night and just cause mass property damage, spray hateful graffiti, slogans, destroy, like smash cars, smash homes, vandalize mosques and other private property. So these are sort of like some of the main kind of attacks that we've seen, but there are some new trends that we're seeing where settler violence in recent years, partially due to the political situation and incitement by leaders, as you mentioned, is really reaching new heights. And basically the main trends that we're seeing are, for one, larger and larger groups of settlers are attacking, and increasingly in broad daylight. So in the last few years, it's been common to see groups of like 30 to 50 settlers literally descend upon a Palestinian town. You know how I mentioned earlier that it used to be that the majority of these attacks would take place along roadsides and in agricultural lands. So settlers are really now emboldened to the point where they have no problem invading Palestinian towns in broad daylight. And actually they're increasingly coming with, not only with the accompaniment of the military. That's something I didn't mention, that for decades now, the military has been standing idly by and not preventing settlers from attacking. But increasingly in recent years, the military is not actually standing idly by anymore. They are actively participating with the settlers. So we've heard in the attacks. So we've heard recently from some of our field researchers who live in the West Bank and document these attacks every day, that settlers will actually wait until the military arrives, and then together with the military, they will invade a town. And basically the role of the military here is, if the Palestinians do anything to fight back or try to defend themselves, the military fires tear gas, stun grenades, and shoots rubber bullets or worse. When actually, of course, the role of the military is actually to protect Palestinians who are, living under military occupation and are entitled to their protection, but they do the opposite. So those are some of the main trends we're seeing right now. Speaking of the sort of an illustration of this is, I know probably most everyone here heard of the attack that happened, the massive pogrom that happened in Hawara in February, where like more than 100 Israelis invaded the town and caused massive property damage, also killed one person and injured several people. But settler violence is actually it happens daily, and it's so common and it's so often not reported in the media at all, in the lead up to that attack in Hawara, there were actually 2 times in about the 6 months prior to that, that settlers invaded Hawara in broad daylight with military accompaniment, like I described, and basically rampaged the town during the day for several days in a row. And the way that the military responds to this, instead of stopping the settlers, is they actually put a closure on the town. So they close all the roads. They don't allow Palestinians to go in and out. They force the businesses to close. And this is their way of like decreasing the tensions and protecting the Palestinians. But actually, they're just completely letting the Israelis dominate and do whatever they want. So the last thing I want to mention about this is I talked about some new trends that we're seeing. But what hasn't changed is the failure of Israeli law enforcement to stop settler violence and to hold violent settlers accountable for ideological violence against Palestinians. So this is one of the main things that my organization does. Since 2005, we have monitored 1,600 police investigations. So basically, we assist Palestinian victims of settler violence to file complaints to the police. And then we monitor the police investigation actually to see what they're doing to try to stop settler violence, if they're doing anything to try to investigate and try to hold these people accountable. And spoiler alert, they're not doing a lot. So basically in this about 1,600 caseload that we have, we see 93% of these cases closed with no indictment filed against the perpetrator. And only 3% of these cases led to a conviction of the settler. And in addition to that, we actually go through the investigative material to see exactly what the police did to investigate. And our analysis shows that there's an 81% failure of the police to investigate settler violence, which means that there was enough evidence either the police did not do enough to try to gather evidence, or there was enough evidence to file an indictment and the police just didn't file an indictment. So just for example, in many of these cases, we will receive the investigative materials by the police, and the only thing in the investigative file is the complaint filed by the Palestinian, meaning the police took literally zero action to try to find who attacked them. And in many cases, there's documentation, there's photos, there's videos. In many cases, the Palestinian knows who it is because it's someone who continually harasses them. So this shows us that basically this settler violence and the fact that it's increasing so much is not incidental. It's intentional policy that allows settlers to attack Palestinians with impunity and is actually a state-backed mechanism that is allowing Israelis to increasingly take over Palestinian land. There have been two Bedouin communities that had to leave, that basically abandoned their villages in recent months because of settler violence and because no one is acting to protect them. So I think that like the incitement we're seeing now by Ben-Gvir and by other ministers is really just a official stamp of approval on what's already been happening for generations.
So there's actually a question in the chat, but I think you answered that really well. But let's take it anyways, because it is specifically about what you're talking about. Just if you want to add on, and then I do want to get to Dania and Samir, but I think this is a really good question. What has brought about the change in the military's role? So when you talk about kind of some of these things that you're seeing and these complaints, like, has that always been the case? If not, what has changed it? Is it official policy? It sounds like from what you're saying, it is actually coming down from the government. Is that right?
The question is about specifically the military's involvement and the military policy. Well, technically, military policy actually, there are stipulations for how the army is supposed to act and what they're supposed to do when they're present in incidences of settler violence, because they're there, maybe not in a majority, but the military is present in a very good amount of settler violence cases. And officially, there's a directive from 1991 that the military is required to protect Palestinians, to stop incidents of violence. They're technically not supposed to arrest Israelis, but they have the authority to detain Israelis and until the police can come. So they do actually have this responsibility, but they deny this responsibility. And there are all of these continual, basically what we see is like a shirking of responsibility between the police and the military. The military says, we don't have the authority to do that. It's the police's job to stop settler violence. The police says, we are physically not present in so many areas in the West Bank. There's like very little police and soldiers are everywhere, and soldiers do have this authority. So there is this like public debate also that's happening between the military and police, although, as I said, there is military policy that requires them to do this, but they're not trained on it. The regular soldiers are not trained. They're not aware of this responsibility. If you ask the higher up, like generals, they're aware of this responsibility. They understand the laws of occupation and that they have a duty to protect the local population, but the average soldier is not made aware of this. And increasingly, there are soldiers and higher ranking officials in the military who are settlers themselves. And so this is sort of naturally how it develops, that the cooperation is just growing.
Great, thanks so much. Hannah, I'm gonna take the spotlight off of you. I'm going to bring in Dani and Samir. There we go. Hannah, thank you so much for all of that. And if you want, Hannah, in the meantime, if you want to put a link to Yesh or anything else that you think would be of interest, that would be great. And with that, I'll welcome Dani and Samir. Dani is the director of the Occupied Territories Department at Rabbis for Human Rights, and Samir Awad is the Palestinian coordinator. I'm going to ask a question of Dani, I'm going to ask a question of Samir, and Dani, you're going to help me translate, and then you're going to translate Samir's answer for us. This time next year, my Arabic will be good enough to do that, but I'll rely on you this time around. So Dani, I know that you compiled a short video of kind of, we were deciding if we want to call it the best of or worst of your experiences as an activist in the territories. Let's just start with if you want to share that video with us.
Yeah.
You want to share the screen and show us that video?
Let's do it. Do you all see it? Yeah. Stop sharing. Yeah.
Great. Thanks for that. It's a little bit choppy, but I think we got the picture of what's happening. But why don't you, can you elaborate? I mean, especially like that first shot of the two guys with the like balaclava masks and the clubs. If you want to talk to us a little bit about what we're seeing in that video. I know Dani because we actually went out into the field together. He is one of the coordinators on the day that I was there. And so I've actually seen firsthand how passionate you are about this work, to the point of really putting yourself on the front lines, putting yourself at risk. You were recently in Ain Samia. For folks that know, that was a Palestinian village that the residents actually just eventually gave up and left because of all the harassment they were facing from violence. And you told me that they were actually being subjected to violence even as they were like packing up and getting ready to leave. So can you, I'm curious, like talk to us a little bit about what we're seeing in this video, what you're seeing in the field, but also what brings you to this work? What drives you to take these risks and to continue to do this?
So I actually did not pick the best of moments. This was specifically picked from the last month and a half. So if I picked the worst ones, it would be way, way worse. This is just things that happened very, very recently to give you a very recent picture. So what you're seeing, the people with the clubs, these are a few separate times that we went to a village called Turmusaya in the Ramallah region. And we were actually, the first time, we didn't even come for an activity. We came for a regular meeting with a few people in the village, and they told us, listen, they're attacking right now. And of course, we came there, and these two masked people, they started running towards us with clubs. The person behind them is the Ravshatz. He's supposed to be protecting, he's a civilian with a gun that's supposed to be protecting the settlement. And they came to attack us, and they didn't succeed only because the military intervened last second. So, and we're seeing a lot of this. Sometimes when we come to the field, then the settlers are a little more calm and will not interfere with us. But more and more often we come and the settlers do not care that we're there. They'll either just attack us, which happened on a few occasions, in extreme scenarios, even sending some of my activists to the hospital. And sometimes they will just come and do whatever they were planning to do and try to ignore us. And we, as you saw in the video that we were blocking in ATV, a small vehicle, right? That vehicle was trying to push a whole flock of sheep into the road where A, they will not have any food, and B, they might get run over. So we stopped to block the car. And this guy will come whether we're there or not. If we're not there, he might do something a little more extreme. He might throw rocks at the sheep. He might do something like that. But when we're there, he's a little more calm, but he'll do stuff like that. And so what brings me to this work is really, I started my activism about 4 or 5 years ago when I went on a tour of Hebron. And the reality, unfortunately, only worsened since then. And every time I go to the field, I see people that even when I'm there, it is so difficult for them to access their lands, so difficult to access their livelihoods, so hard to protect themselves from simply dying. You know, I don't know if you saw, but the clubs, they have nails in them. One hit in the head with that, and you can die. And so I know that if I'll not come there, these people will either leave, or they will risk themselves, as happened in Burqa in the Nablus region, and a person was just killed, and then another person was picking za'atar a year ago, who was just shot in the foot. And so it's really, this is what drives me, the knowing that these people, even with protection, it's problematic, but without protection, there's just no chance. And Ain Samia, when we were there, that was actually, you know, this is first of all a case of where we really failed them. Unfortunately, we really failed in Samia because there is no state order for them to evacuate. There is no legal order or court order. No one asked. They literally just are leaving, and they're not the first ones to do so, due to continued settler attacks that are so bad that while they were packing up leaving, which took about 5 days to a week, something like that, they had to move all the caravans and all the equipment, everything, to about 15 kilometers away to a different place. And we were called actually because they were attacked every night that they were packing. And then we came, they were attacked also, but they were a little more calm when we were there. They only attacked the school and broke its windows, whereas we were afraid that they're gonna just burn their whole field completely, which is, you know, something we saw in Hawara, something we see many times. And so that's what we expected. We got a little lucky, but they were just attacked so much. It was so dangerous for them that they had to leave, and they had to leave to a place that isn't much safer. They only for a little bit of more safety. They left the area completely. I believe there were about 8 more communities in the last 10 years that have done the same. I'm glad people have heard of Ain Samia. I'm glad that it became so high profile. But yeah, in some areas of the Jordan Valley, we see places that had 10 communities, 15 communities, and it's just deserted. It's actually settlers doing foreign policy or doing whatever you may call it with their violence, just completely, instead of the law, instead of any sort of state structure, really, they are doing the policy, which is really crazy.
Thanks for that. I don't know if I I keep saying thank you, but that does not feel like the right word for what we're hearing today. But thank you for your honesty. And on that exact note, I want to move over to Samir and ask specifically. So first of all, I know, Samir, that we've talked about Hawara a couple times already. I know that you were actually there during that attack that happened. So, you know, we hear a lot about the perspective of the Jews and the Israelis as allies showing up to kind of fight with you in the struggle for justice, and we endeavor to do so, but you're the one having those experiences firsthand. So I want to know your perspective on, I guess, two things. First of all, just your truth and your fight for freedom for yourself and your own people, and also how that ties in with working with Israeli and Jewish NGOs and organizations.
אנחנו רוצים לשמוע על המאבק שלך על חופש ולחירות, ואיך זה מתקשר לעבודה עם ישראלים.
סלאם עליכום. הלו לכולם. צריך לתרגם לה?
לא, זה מבין.
בחווארה היה לילה שחורה.
There was a black night in Hawara.
הכל מתנחלים, מכל מתנחלים, מתנחלות בשטחים, באים לחווארה.
Basically the whole West Bank descended onto Hawara, not just the settlements around it.
כולם היה עומדים על המחסום תפוח.
They all stood on the
באים עם אוטובוסים, עם רכבים, אחרי כך ירדו בדרך, ממשיכים ברגל.
So they stood on the checkpoint with their buses and vehicles, and then they start walking.
יש להם נשק, ויש להם בזל, ויש להם בנזין.
They had gasoline, they had weapons.
יש 300 אנשים קבלו מקומות.
300 people were attacked with weapons.
יש 35 בית בבניין גדול שרפו באש.
35 buildings were burned to a crisp.
רחבות, עוד טרקטורים של חקלאים פלסטינאים.
Including agricultural vehicles.
באש גם, באש. אני ראיתי שם בעיניים שלי, באמת שטח מסוכן. אני לא ראיתי. אני בן גיל 37, עד עכשיו לא ראיתי. לא רק אני דברתי זה. וגם יש זקנה שם, היה שמעת זה מה אמרה, היא בן גיל 80, לא ראה את זה בכלל.
So he says he saw within his own eyes a sort of danger that he's never seen in his life, and that the old people in the village said that they're never seen anything on this scale.
לימת הכל באש, מירוק, מיבש, הכל שרפו אותו באש.
Everything was burned. Everything that could have been set on fire had.
הכל.
All the trees around were immediately set on fire. There's a lot of trees in Hawara.
חטפו את העצים, צלטים הרבה גם.
They also just cut down a lot of trees.
בשטח חווארה עד עכשיו סגור.
And Hawara, Hannah mentioned how it was closed down, quote unquote, to protect the Palestinians, but it's actually still closed. It's still being closed, and still every night there's violence.
אני הייתי שם במלחמה, אתה ראית, וגם אני ברחתי.
Samir actually had to run away.
וגם שברו את האוטו שאני הגעתי לשם במונית. אני ברחתי והוא ברח בדרך אחר. השטח שם מסוכן, דני מסוכן עד עכשיו. עד עכשיו, לשעה 7-8, רגוע, אחרי כך, זה משהו אחר.
Samir came in a cab, and the cab driver actually dropped him off and ran away. And so Samir, I remember that also, Samir actually had to hide behind the trees and wait for a ride from a friend. That's how crazy it was. And to this day, until 7-8 o'clock, it's calm, then all hell breaks loose again.
מתי הייתי שם? הכפר שלי קרוב 4 קילומטר.
His village where he lives is 4 kilometers away, 10 minutes.
5 שעות לחזור הביתה. הכל בין העצים חיילים. הכל, בוא אתה תסתכל, יש חיילים. לא שומרים עלינו, על המתנחלים.
Even though it's 10 minutes away, it took him 5 hours to come back because there were soldiers everywhere and they weren't protecting him, they were protecting the settlers.
וגם משטרה, לא עושים כלום, לא עושים כלום. אחרי המלחמה, השטח חווארה סגור. אסור לך להיכנס, להמשיך ברגל על הכביש.
You can't even walk.
היה 10 ימים סגור.
10 days, it was closed off hermetically.
אחרי כך אמרו להם, מותר לכם לפתוח את המרקט, משהו כזה, שעתיים ביום.
Afterwards, they said you can open the shops. Hawara has a big trade sector, but only for 2 hours a day.
המתנחל ממשיך באוטו שלו מחווארה, הוא מתקשר לצבא במשטרה, זרקו את האבנים, אחרי כך סוגרים עוד
A
3
settler, all the settler had to do was drive through, call the police, say rocks were thrown, whether that's true or not. That's it. The village is closed again.
يعني שטח חווארה זה שטח מסוכן. עכשיו לא חווארה, עכשיו חווארתה, בורין, ביתא, הכל אזור שכם. הכל אזור שכם, וגם נבלוס, שכם, סגור. יש מחסומים, אם אתה רוצה לעמוד על המחסום, 4-5 שעות שרוצה לעבור.
So the whole area is closed up with checkpoints and you can pass, but it'll take you hours.
כל יום גונבים את האדמת שלנו. כל יום שורפים את הכל מקומות, עצים, רחובות, בג'לוד, בכל מקום באש.
Every day they try to take over our lands. They burn things. There was a high-profile attack on Jalud a few weeks ago.
וגם מתנחלים גנבו את הטרקטור בקריות. אתה ראית מה עשו שם.
In Kiryut, settlers stole a tractor. Every place there's something and it's just constantly going on. It's actually an ongoing pogrom in the whole area. It's not just one night or every so often a high-profile thing. It's just ongoing without an end.
הממשלה זה היא נוטלים את האישור ירוק למתנחלים שיעשו משהו.
The government gives a green light to the settlers to do whatever they want.
אף אחד לא שואל אותם.
No one asks any questions. No one tries to interfere in any way.
אתה ראית, גם במסיק, בעבודה שלנו, בשנה עברה. אמא שלי בן גיל 65, הרבש"ץ של איתמר הוא מרביץ לה.
So during the harvest season, the security person of Shatz of the settlement of Itamar, he came to Samir's mom and he attacked her physically.
יש הרבה חיילים וגם קצינים גדולים שם. אף אחד לא שואל אותו.
And no one asked any questions. He attacked an elderly lady. No one asked any questions. No one did anything, even though the soldiers were there.
אחרי כך, אני ואחים שלי שתיכן, לקחו אותנו למשרד של רבש"ץ באיתמר. אמרו לו, הכל בסדר, אתה רגוע עכשיו?
We were arrested. They were taken to the Itamar settlement and they asked him if he calmed down and if everything's okay after they attacked his mom.
يعني نحن يعني نحكي لهم شكرا للجميع لوقوفكم مع الشعب الفلسطيني مع الحقلائيين الفلسطينيين يعني احنا بجد نشكرهم باسم كل الفلاحين الفلسطينيين.
He's saying that the Palestinian villagers and everyone that lives there is really, really thankful for the assistance and for all the attention that they're getting because it really helps. And
لأنه حقيقة يعني كل زمان هيتم המתנדבים שלנו וגם ארגונים אחרים. אני לא יודע איזה ארגונים, אני מסתכל על ארגון שלנו איפה אנחנו עובדים במסיק. אנחנו, השטח שלנו מסוכן. אם ירדו מתנחלים מרביסים למתנדבים שלנו וחכמים לפני החקלאים פלסטינים.
So he says that
כל הזמן עוזרים להם.
Simply come and be shields to the Palestinians. They will attack so that the settlers attack the activists first and not the farmers. Basically, we stand there as a shield. Settlers don't discriminate. Israeli Palestinians don't care.
הוא מגיע לעזור לפלסטיני, הוא יותר קשה מפלסטיני.
If you're an Israeli that came to assist the Palestinian, you're actually worse.
אתה ראית בבורין, שרפו את האוטו של מתנדב שם, את הידיים של אריק וגם עוד מתנדבים.
They broke the hands of some of our activists in Burin. They torched a car. This was a year and a half ago.
يعني כל הזמן הולכים למקום, يعني עבוד במקום מסוכן, אבל אולהם שיעזור לנו. אתה ראית דני, נכון?
So we always go to work in the most dangerous places, he says, and may God help us.
רסול الجيش, חיילים במשטרה, בוא נגיד מתי יש ממשלת בן גביר, לא עושים כלום למתנחלים. המתנחל הוא באדמה שלו. התנחלות, לפני השנה יש התנחלות קטנות. אחרי השנה היה גדולים. כל יום גונבים הרבה אדמות, הרבה.
The current government has given a green light to the expansion of settlements, to stealing much more land that they saw before. that the army cares even less or interferes even less than they usually have?
אף אחד לא שואל אותם, אף אחד לא שואל אותם מה יעשו, וזהו, ותודה רבה לכולם, תגיד להם. באמת, אנחנו يعني الفلاحين الفلسطينيين احنا بنشكرهم من القلب وقوفهم وصمودهم معنا وكل الشكر لهم.
So he says the farmers thank us from the bottom of their hearts that we stand with them in solidarity and that we're with them in those moments.
Thank you so much, Danny. Samir, shukran, toda rabba. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us and being with us here today. So for our last guest, I am going to bring in Rabbi Stacy Blank. Hi, Rabbi. And so the reason I think it's really poignant to close the formal moderated portion, hearing from Rabbi Blank today. Rabbi Stacy Blank is an American Israeli Reform rabbi currently based in Jerusalem. You know, we have these conversations. Hannah said it at the beginning, these conversations are difficult. It's a Sunday, it's Father's Day. It's not really a day where, you know, this is a lot of heavy stuff, and you know, it's incredible that folks have joined to hear about this today. And you know, I think a lot of times we leave from these heavy conversations not really knowing what to do, or feeling really dejected, maybe feeling embarrassed, or like we're helpless, especially being halfway across the world. So I want to ask you, Rabbi, from everything we've heard today from all of our amazing guests, what kind of reflection do you have on how our Jewish values guide us, how our Judaism and our faith strengthens us to be allies and to work for a better future, and to give us some hope to end this session today?
Okay, well, thank you for the invitation and for the honor and the responsibility to hopefully bring some words of wisdom from our tradition and hope. I made Aliyah in 2005 out of really love for Zion, love for Israel, and a sense of being at home, and also a sense of mission. I felt very much a part of the story of what's happening here in Israel, and felt like by being here, I could hopefully, we'll see, contribute to making what we imagined Israel to be. And if I could go back to the prophets, I could say a light unto the nations. And if I look a little closer to the Declaration of Independence, I can sign off on everything written there. And I won't lie and say it's not a challenge, and that it's not depressing, and it's really difficult to hear always again and again the stories. And I've had also the privilege of being led by Samir and Danny more recently, but Samir in the field. I participated in the olive harvest, and I'll just bring an anecdote. When I went to an olive harvest a few years ago, I didn't ride with the bus. I rode with my colleague, Rabbi Nava Chefetz, who is a warrior and is veteran in the field and knows everybody. And she took me in her car, and we drove from Jerusalem up north on Route 60, and she explained to me along the way. And we participated in the olive harvest, and everything that Danny and Samir said, I 100% agree with. Our presence is really important for the Palestinians, to see there are Israelis who stand with them, for the soldiers to see that there are Israelis who see the importance of peace and coexistence and mutual assistance, and for the settlers who, unfortunately, whose intention is violence, and to be, unfortunately, some have been human shields, but to be kind of a beacon in the field. And we drove back through Hawara, and Rabbi Nava took me to a bakery, a sweet shop, and she knew all the people in the neighborhood, and we had a wonderful experience there. And I think it's really important to share with all of you. It's important to share with everybody what's happening. I myself, when I was a rabbi in Tzur Adasa of a Reform synagogue there, organized Tzur Adasa, which sits on the Green Line, organize a dialogue of Palestinian and Jewish women who are neighbors, who live within a few kilometers of each other, but had no opportunity of meeting each other. And the one thing that they asked is like, please tell our story. If anything comes out of this, please share our story. And they have incredible stories of overcoming fear and violence. And I believe every Israeli has to go and visit and bear witness and see these stories. So when I come as myself, as a Jew who tries to live a life based on Jewish values, where do my values, where do I bring them from? So I want to come from the universal, take from the universal and from the particular. That's my Judaism. And if I start with the universal, I begin with, which I believe is the ultimate statement of human rights. Vayivra Elohim et Adam b'tzalmo, b'tzelem Elohim bara oto. God created Adam, the human, in God's image. All humans, we don't have to say evolutionary wise or whatever you believe about that, but our story, kind of our moral setting, is that all humans are descended from one person. That means, first of all, we're all one big family. The second thing it means when we say we are all in God's image, that we all are vessels of holiness. Every person, every human being is as much worth as the second. Whether you're thinking about artists, artistic talent, or you're talking about science knowledge, or you're talking about any kind of capability, every person has worth. And the Mishnah in Sanhedrin takes that idea, and it says that according to that, one person was created alone. It teaches us that any person who causes the loss of one other person, one other soul, it is as if he has caused the loss of an entire world. And it's interesting because there are texts, Talmudic texts that say any person, it's universal. And there are Talmudic texts that say any person from Israel. And one could say this highlights one of our main divisions today in Israel, certainly. Our main concern is humanity. All people, regardless of their background or their nation or their religion, or is our first concern the Jewish people? Or is there a way to say we can live with both of those things together? But certainly the discussion, what we can say here is a general principle. Killing someone is a great loss. It is not an action to be taken lightly. And certainly raising the awareness and discussion of the rising violence, everything we've heard today, I can give a backup to from what I've learned and seen. We cannot take it lightly. And the question is, what are we fighting about? So we could look also to our biblical ancestors in the universal sense. What does it mean to act out of violence? We have the story of Cain and Abel. Cain, who killed his brother Abel. And in the story, it says Cain said, but we don't know what Cain said. So the Midrash tries to fill that in for us. They say, what were they talking about? And they said that they were saying together, come, let's divide the world between us. One took all the land. The other took all of the movable property and portable property. One said, the land you're standing on is mine. So get off of it. You don't have anywhere to stand. The second one said, well, what you're wearing is mine. Take it off. Everything you have is mine. And they say, out of this quarrel, Cain rose up against his brother Abel. It is the sense of mine, is that all is mine. This is what creates an untenable situation. If all the land belongs to one, the other has no place to stand. If all the movable property belongs to one, then the other can have no possessions, not even the clothes on his back. So what does this teach us? If we as human beings are to live together, there must be an element of sharing. If a situation becomes an either or it's all mine, nothing yours, the direct result is most likely going to be bloodshed. And that is the direction that we see happening in the territories and in the settlements, and it's very distressing. But this is not our tradition. Our tradition teaches us in the land of Israel, and I think you could apply that to other places. In the land of Israel, nothing here belongs to us. The land doesn't belong to us. The land belongs to God. God created it, and God made us stewards of the land. Why did God put Adam in the Garden of Eden? To protect it. And also in the land, God says in Leviticus, Ki li haaretz, ki gerim v'toshavim atem imadi. God says the land is mine. You, the Israelites, the Jews, you are but strangers resident with me. And we know these words because usually we are calling the strangers, the residents, the others who live with us in the land. And even in that case, we are told to over and over again, remember that we were strangers in the land. In the book of Deuteronomy, it teaches us when you have eaten your fill and you build fine houses to live in, and your herds and flocks have multiplied, and your silver and gold have increased, and everything going has prospered. Okay, it sounds a little like Israel today, not a perfect country, but we've come very far in 75 years. Ve'ram levavecha, v'shechachtet Adonai Elohecha, hamotziacha me'eretz Mitzrayim me'beit avadim. Beware, lest your heart grows haughty and you forget your God, who freed you from the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. We need to remember. What does that mean? What is this warning? This warning, according to our interpreters, is to not lose our heads. This warning is to remember that we were once in the lowest place. We were the ones who they were setting fire to our houses. We were the ones that they were chasing. We were ones that intense, incredible violence was committed against us. Living in the land is a responsibility. We can be nostalgic for Abraham, our ancestor. He wandered the land, he went in and out, but he did not have the responsibility that we have today. We are a people who have lived in different lands, continue to live in different lands, each land having a local identity, each having a Jerusalem orientation. And we, in the great numbers, and our people have returned to that land. And this existence in the land demands responsibility. We need to bring front and center these central teachings of Judaism, along with many, many others. All human life is of value. Our ability to live and prosper in the land is dependent on how we treat among ourselves, each other, and the other, Hager v'atoshav, the one who is not of us, and the resident who is not of us. They are partners with us in the land. Our ability to live and to prosper in the land is dependent on how we treat each other and our ability to make peace, not to drive other people out, not to make them lives miserable for the sake of our lordship, to be Adonai Haaretz, to be the lords of the land. Our prayers, the central prayers of Judaism, Lo yisagoy agoy cherev, Lo yimedu ad milchama, that we will not lift up swords or any kind of weapons like we saw in that video, and that we should not learn any kind of war, and that's any kind of violence, because Adonai oz la'amo yiten, v'Adonai yivarech et amo b'shalom. God gives strength to our people. God blesses our people with peace. Strength is not in violence and lording it over and oppressing. Strength is in peace. Peace is dialogue. Peace is compromise. Peace is seeing the other, every other, my neighbor, my family members, the ones of other religions, of other nationalities, the ones of other languages who live in this land with me. Peace is seeing every single one as a human being. And I do believe there are many partners out there. We need to be in communication. We need to learn and educate ourselves, Jews in Israel, outside of Israel. And I do believe, and our partners, friends like Samir and so many others who we together can raise those voices. And that's what we're doing in Rabbis for Human Rights. Hopefully making these voices heard more and more in Israeli society and around the world. Thank you so much for being here today.
Rabbi, thank you so much. That was incredible. That was beautiful. What a wonderful note to end this webinar on. I'm glad we're recording this because I'm probably going to go back to this and rewatch it in difficult times. So I really appreciate that. So we're getting right towards the end here. I think there were a few questions in the chat, but we did get to all of them. I know there's a question about how much of the IDF is made up of settlers. I think we did talk about that a little bit. I think Dani kind of referenced that and the ideological bent that we see growing within the IDF for sure. So I think because we do, does anyone want to raise their hand or ask a question in the chat that can be answered in like 2 minutes? Otherwise, I'll do my ending spiel and we can finish right on time. Okay, great. So here's what I want to say. I usually give a little spiel at the end of every webinar, usually very similar. I know that quite a few folks that are on this call today donated to JSpace when they registered for this webinar. We really, really do appreciate it. That's how we manage this programming and bring you these guests every single month. If you haven't made a donation and can, you will get an email with the recording following this session. It would be wonderful to have your support, $5, $10, $18, whatever you have. But I want to say that really quickly because I want to say something a little bit different this time, which is that, as I referenced with Dani, I actually know these folks because when I was in Israel a couple months ago, I just on a whim emailed like the info address at Rabbis for Human Rights, and I said, I'm going to be there. I want to get involved. What can I do? I was invited on a shepherd accompaniment, and it was truly one of the most transformative, one of the most effective, one of the most influential things I have done ever, I think. And so I do want to put our stuff aside and really spotlight and highlight the work of Yesh and Rabbis for Human Rights and say, you know, as Rabbi Blank talked about in terms of bearing witness, if you are in the region, if you are physically capable of joining any of these tours, any of these organizations, and bearing witness, I really encourage you to do so. I think oftentimes when we're far away, it feels like it's all negative, or like, you know, we're just kind of airing our dirty laundry all the time. When you get there, when you're in the field, when you're working with these amazing activists, when you see the true shared society, the true allyship that exists between these activists and the Palestinian partners in the territories, it is so uplifting. It is so inspiring. It will, I think, I hope for me, it did just renew my commitment to Judaism, my commitment to the land of Israel. I really, really highly encourage it. I did put a link to the Rabbis for Human Rights website, and I see that there's also, Dani just put in, yes, this is great. We know a lot of times at B'nai Mitzvot, there's often like a plant a tree in Israel through JNF. If that makes you feel a little squeamish and you don't want to do that, you can actually donate to Planting Justice, which is when a tree gets planted in the West Bank together with Jews and Palestinian communities. And Dani put that link in the chat, tree-8rhr.org. Thank you so much, Dani. So with that, we'll put all of these links in an email for you as well. You don't have to worry about copying them all from the chat. I do really want to thank everyone for being with us here today once again, for listening to these voices, for listening to these stories. We can only make change. We can only get to a point where we've ended the work if we first begin the work. So thank you everyone for taking these steps with us today. Thank you for being with us today. For those who have joined us on other webinars, it's great to see you once again here and have your continued support. With that, I'll let everyone go and enjoy the rest of their day/evening. Thank you so much.